started out my, right?
Sorry, I also just so everyone knows we're going to be recording it so other people can look at it. So if you don't want to be in the recording, if you want to just turn your video off, and then sorry, Maria, if you want to
Oh,
continue.
it's okay. No, that's great. That way we can share it to more people, right? The
Mhm.
coolness of these misunderstood organisms. So my background is I'm considered a functional morphologist, meaning that I like to look at the anatomy of an organism and see how it functions. So I did my work at Long Island University, where I got to actually go to do major work at the American Museum of Natural History. So I played with bats in jars, and that was really cool. And you can see in this very happy picture of me, this is my first living bat in my hands. That happened in Trinidad. So I did work on wing folding in bats, and I also looked at the evolution of how the different types of folding they did. And I grew up in Bridgewater. This has been my home, and I really wanted to go back because I'm very close to my family. They're very, very supportive of me. So I came back to Bridgewater, and I ended up working at Bridgewater State University, where I've been there for about 15 years. I teach anatomy and physiology. I teach courses on bat biology, soundscape ecology, and I just absolutely love it. Also because I get to do my own research. So I go out in the summertime and I make mentor students, and we put up these what is called mist nets, and you can see a couple of our little friends that we caught a few years back, and I tag them and release them, so it's a catch and release. But I also look at the soundscapes ecology, so look at the using recordings of bats to see how the health of the environment is. And then just recently, I've become the wildlife consultant and advisor to a great company, local Bridgewater company called Arc Industries. And they have a very unique wind turbine, small wind turbine that they've created. So I do some scientific study with them. So when we're looking at the perception of bats, how the public perceives bats, right? I like to kind of get people thinking about what do we think about with bats? Are we looking at them as perceiving them in a certain way, positive or negative? My feeling is that they're very misunderstood organisms. Of late, there's a lot of misconceptions that may be surrounding them. And when you Google bats online, you get a lot of these scary fang-like images, maybe a drop of blood. We also, of course, have the great horror films of the 1980s, the horror films. And we're now getting into a more period where the public wants to know more and broaden the conception of what bats are, especially since they're linked to as a reservoir for SARS-CoV-2, which causes COVID-19. So we're going to talk a little bit about that too, and how that jump over or spillover may have happened. But I want you to really kind of take away today how amazing and diverse these animals are, and what they can offer us, because when you want to save a species or a group of animals, we do have to, in order to sell it, we need to show how can the human population gain. I'm sure that many people in this Zoom room are, they would definitely like share their love that's selflessly giving to people and animals, but on the bigger scheme of things, we got to share and appreciate bats and what they can do for us. So selfishly, I love looking at pictures of bats. I am just obsessed with it, and I can get lost in how cool they are and how diverse they are. These are just some of the profile pictures. A lot of the images that I'm using today is from Merlin Tuttle, and you can see in access all of these amazing images from his website. But what he did was in the 1970s, he's a bat biologist, and he was looking for working with National Geographic, and he wanted to he was doing images on bats, and he realized like all the images out there are of the snarling, scary bats. So he said the rest of his career, and he still is very much working in bat biology and still taking images. He made his long career in creating these beautiful images, these profile images, especially of bats giving it's like glamour shots. It's the best of them, and they're not snarling, and sometimes they're adorable and their like cheeks are full of food. So you can just see the personalities of these different individuals. And as a morphologist, I really like to see how their anatomy, especially this guy right here, allows them to make a living. And we'll get to a couple of these as we go through. So overall, bats are our second largest order of mammals. So our first is rodents. Bats are very distantly related to rodents. They're not flying mice. And they are they're a very diverse species. So there's about 1,400 species or different kinds of bats, and they fall into 19 different families. There are only true flying mammals. We have gliding mammals like flying squirrel, but these are the only ones that are capable of true powered flight. They have such exorbitant adaptations. Some bats have they roost in these, and that's their home base where they sleep. They roost in these furled leaves that curl up, and they have these suction cups that allow them to stick onto that leaf. And other bats are able to, they have these really large noses, these called leaf nose, and that allows them to receive echolocation calls as they're flying. So extraordinary adaptations. They also have a very unique life history. So how big they are, how much energy they use, how long they live. We have bats that live about 40 years. The little brown bat, there's some that have been known to live that long in the wild, by the way, not just in captivity. And they're super gregarious. So they are social beings. They're during some of the bats we have, the cave bats, during the wintertime, they'll go into hibernation. And what they do is they clump together, and they share in that warmth in the cave. So they share with their kin their thermoregulation, so they keep a little bit warmer than the cave wall. And it's actually called cuddling, which is very cute. But they have these very unique social behaviors. I'll talk a little bit about vampire bats, and they have a crazy cool way where it's called reciprocal altruism, where they're going to share their meal with a non-relative, which is very cool. They also are not mice, so they don't give birth to many pups or a litter of they give birth to one, maybe two. There's some species of bat that definitely always has two twins. My mother's a twin, so yay, twins. But they only give about one pup, maybe two a year. Rarely, sometimes there's triplets, and it's an exorbitant amount of energy that goes into that pup. So just to give you perspective, a bat will give birth when the pup is about 30% of their mother's weight. So think about that. If all the mothers out there giving birth to a 30% child. And by the time they give birth, they're already able to, within a day or two, echolocate in some species and also fly. But you can see in this image of how this is a maternity roost, the little bald heads. So some bats are born with hair, some are not, kind of like kids. And they'll share in the female bats in these nursery roosts will share in the rearing and help each other out. So I'm going to go through some of the really cool profile pictures by Merlin Tuttle, just to give you perspective on what the diversity is. And this is really just showing their profile. When you look at the rest of their body, it's going, there's so much more that you can learn from it. So we have 1,400 species, 19 different families. Only one family are the megabats, and also known as flying foxes. These bats are, they use their eyesight as their main mode of finding food and interacting with each other. And even within this this is considered a very general family. You see there is diversity in the color of their hair, the wings. These are the larger bats that we have. They can reach up to 6-foot wingspan, so very big. They only use sight, so their vision is their main mode of getting around. And these are the ones that you'll see if you go to Australia or Cambodia. They are hanging in the trees and they're out in the open during the day. They even will use their wing to fan themselves. But they're all fruit eaters. All of these in the family are fruit eaters. They're very important when it comes to seed dispersal and pollination. And here we have our microbats. So this is a very general term, megabat, microbat. Mega being larger, using vision. Micro, diversity in how big they are, but they can get big and they can go really small, the size of your thumbnail. We have a bumblebee bat that's that size. And all of the microbats can see. No bat is blind, but they use another mode of sensing the world, and that's echolocation. So they're able to create the sound, send it out, and receive information back. And when you think of that function, right, and you look at the structure that they're receiving the information, it's kind of cool to see structures like this funnel-eared bat, how it actually has these cones that are bringing the information back into its very complex portion of its brain. I would be dismissed if I skip over my two favorite non-vampires. This is the greater bulldog bat, and yes, it has a bulldog face, but it is it gaffs fish out of the water. So this is image of its hind limb. And bats have, of course, the forelimbs have the web, that's their flight membrane. But the hind limb in this has a really kind of extreme gafting hooks, and it will fly over a stream and its echolocation will actually pick up the fin of a fish going through the water, and it will gaff it out. And then we have over here, this is the wrinkle-faced bat. It has males only, but it has a very complex facial features, all these wrinkles on it. And the function of these wrinkles is actually, it's a fruit eater. And when it goes and eats, it's a very messy eater. All of that juice goes into its mouth because it's funneled through these ridges. And males actually have a flap. So they have a translucent piece of skin that folds over when they go to sleep to protect it. I'm not sure why females didn't evolve that, but. So all our bats, these are flying mammals, and they're the only group that actually do that. And they have this unique ability to do it. So they have their large wing membrane. Their anatomy is basically the same of what we have. So they have the 5 digits. They have a thumb that's not attached to the membrane. And then there's a nice membrane in between. Now, this membrane is not only, you think like, oh, it's just skin. It's just a flap that allows for lift to happen. No, no, no. When we look at it underneath the microscope, what we see is a series of nerve endings of muscles. They're actually able to change the angle based on down to a very delicate muscle. They are able to actually respire to exchange gases through their wing membrane. So it's a very complex structure. And their pattern of flight, very different. We've seen, there's 1,400 species. There's so many different flight patterns that they show, but basically they can go into three groups. If they are a migrator, and we have a lot of migrating bats, they migrate, they like to go straight, and they are fast flyers. They have nice narrow wings, similar to what you would see in some planes, right? If they're a slower maneuverable bat, these bats are underneath the canopy of a forest. And so they're flying and they're able to dodge all of these trees and obstacles. So they're slower, they're non-migrators, but they also are really maneuverable. And then there's hoverers. Now, similar to the mechanisms of a hovering bird, right? I'm like, what are they called? Hummingbirds, there you go. Similar to a hummingbird, how they do it is they are able to maintain a forward thrust and backward thrust at the same time. And that keeps them in a hovering situation. And you can see in this image, this is a long-nosed bat that has a very long nose and a super duper long tongue. And that tongue is going into this flower where the nectar is. And at the same time, so it's hovering over it. At the same time, it's getting all that pollen around its face. Now, many people, and it's about this time at night and you're outside and you're looking up, you're like, is that a bird or is that a bat? One way to tell is birds are smooth and graceful, right? Most of them. Bats are clumsy. They seem to be clumsy in the sky, and there's a reason for that. Bats are actually in a bird, right? If you sit down to your turkey dinner or chicken, all the bird's muscles, flight muscles, are in the front of their body. Similar to like an airplane, the cargo goes on the bottom. And if in bats, however, all of the flight muscles are actually on their back. So that means that gravity is they're constantly fighting gravity. And that's a big reason why you have the heavy flutters. And then the sonar of bats. So echolocation is known to a couple of animals, dolphins, some shrews echolocate. Bats are really fantastic at it. What they do is they produce an ultrasonic sound. So ultrasonic means it's above our hearing, and that's about 20 kilohertz of sound. And so what they do is they produce that sound in the same mechanism as we do. As we produce in our voice, right? We use a structure called a larynx, and it has, our vocal folds, cords there that vibrate, producing sound. Well, they make these high-pitched sounds, and they send them out. It bounces off an object, and then information in the form of an echo comes back. And it comes back and is received in these really ornate, these beautiful large ears that funnel it in. Also, what's called a nose leaf. Some bats have a nose leaf like this, like a spear. And those are receiving information, and it's sending it to a part of the brain that's evaluating that returned information. It's evaluating, is this moving organisms, like is it stagnant like a tree? They can identify how fast insect or something like a moth is going either towards them or away. The relative size. They can even determine the difference between a pine tree and a deciduous tree. So it's amazing, and they're receiving this information at all times and evaluating. And as they send out these information, these calls, and you can see it here, if we were out tonight, and I hope in the future, maybe we can get outside and I can show you these tools. But if a bat was flying up, I have recording devices that I can record their echolocation calls. It's not audible to our ears, but what it's showing is a graphical representation. So the frequency, these little kicks are the frequency over time. And up here in red, this is how loud it is. And I can identify not only a species of bat based on their unique call structure, but I can also determine what the bat's doing if I can't visually see it. Because a bat is going to send out more calls, pulses, to gain more information. And so as it's approaching a target, it's going to increase that call frequency and hopefully scoop up the moth or something as it's going. So very, very cool, interesting things. So we have a very unique mammal, right? We have long lifespans for their body, 30 plus years. They range in size. This is the bumblebee bat. This is a bat that when it's born is about the size of your pad on your thumb. These are in Thailand. And then over here we have a giant flying fox, and that gets up to 6 feet in wingspan. So range of sizes found everywhere in the world. Most of them, all but those mega foxes and flying foxes, echolocate. And they have very different adaptable food, so diet choice and roost choice. So roost is where they call home. Some are in caves, some are in the hollows of a tree, some are right out in the open. These are actually bats that they line a tree bark and they're mimicking the bark, so you can't really see them. And so there's some very unique mechanisms that they do. And these bats, these are the Honduran white bat. They will go, and there's in a large banana leaf, they'll go and nibble along the vein, and that's so that the leaf curves in and is a protection. And every night they do this to a different leaf, and that's where they cuddle underneath there. So if I was going out to look for this bat, I'd be looking underneath a lot of leaves and waking them up, usually, because it's during the day. So to go through a couple of the really awesome behaviors and choices on food, let's look at across the board. We have mainly insect eaters. So 70% of all bats feed off of insects. They do it really efficiently. They're able to, because of their echolocation, they're able to eat about 50% of their body weight in insects every single night. If it's a pregnant bat, she's going to be feeding 100% of her body weight every single night. And so they'll go out at dusk. This is the best time to see bats. Wear your DEET, your spray, your bug spray, but sit out in your backyard and you're going to see, especially as the dust settles in, you can see the bats just kind of feeding around you, and sometimes they bicker at each other if you're lucky, because that was my moth. So a lot of insect eaters. They're also bats that prey on agricultural pests, which is really good and saves our economy, our agricultural economy, a lot of money because they feed off of that. Plants, right? We have our fruit and nectar eaters. Over here is a nectar feeding bat that has a doggy bag. It's taking pollen with it, so it goes into that flower and it takes the pollen. Their hairs actually have evolved to co-evolved so that they curl in and they pick up the pollen pieces more efficiently to then pass them to the next flower. And a bat is able to, there are certain plants that are only open at night, and they are specific to bats. They usually smell really bad, and a bat can identify them. We have carnivorous bats feeding off of other animals. So we have our bats that feed off of other bats, smaller bats. This is called the fringe-lipped frog-eating bat. Its lip is all like bumpily, but it feeds off of frogs. This is a bat from Panama, and it's able to actually determine the difference between a poisonous frog and a non-poisonous. So it responds to the calls, the chorus, frog choruses, and it will not choose a poisonous species through its evolution. So it's really cool. And there's our Noctilio, the bulldog bat gafting up a fish. So very, very efficient bats. And my favorites, I worked on vampire bats when I was in Trinidad, and I can't shake my love for them. So our vampires, these are sanguivores. They feed solely on blood. Out of the 1,400 species, only 3 of them are blood feeders. Only 1 is actually feeds off of mammal blood. The other 2 are bird avian blood. So we have our common vampire, very distinguished gentleman, and he has this ability to actually do these push-ups. So if it's crawling on its prey, it finds its prey, it finds the capillaries on the surface because it has heat sensors on its face, and so it'll crawl up, find a nice area of capillaries, and it has a very it only has canines and an incisor. It will nick an opening and then lap up the blood. And it has an anticoagulant too in its saliva. So it's lapping up, and as it's doing that, the blood flows for about 20 minutes. And their intestines are extremely efficient, that they're able to process and get those nutrients out of that blood and then urinate as they're feeding. So I wouldn't suggest doing that for any kids out there while you're eating dinner. Don't do that. And then we have these are definite glamour shots, the white-winged vampire. And they're going to feed off of bird blood. Here we have a hairy-legged vampire bat that's feeding off of a chicken. This bat evolved the ability to actually mimic a chick. So in the hen house, a hen will be sitting on her chick and keeping it close to her, warming it during the night. Well, this hairy-legged vampire has evolved a mechanism to actually climb up, kick the chick out of from the hen without waking up the hen, and then feed off of the mother, mimicking the young. So very, very cool. The reciprocal altruism that I mentioned earlier. So this is seen in the common vampire bat. If a bat doesn't feed for 3 nights straight, it dies. So it starves to death. So what has been observed is that these bats are actually if it's unsuccessful, it will go back to a roost where other bats are, and it will nuzzle up to another successful bat, so fed that night. And that bat will then regurgitate some of its food to help sustain the other one. And what's really interesting is that these do not have to be related. That's a common thing in biology, that kinship, that you help your genetic similarity. These bats are not genetically related. So it's a very interesting mechanism that they're doing. And they also identify cheaters. So if later on that bat who received the blood doesn't reciprocate, they will cast it out of their roost. Oh, very cool. And then, because I just think it's really cool, these bats have the ability to do push-ups. And so this is a video that a friend of mine, Dan Riskin, did. He trained a vampire bat, to go on a treadmill. And it's just fun. So look at those muscles on the back too, but it's fold his wings up, and wouldn't you love to go to bed with that outside? All right, so I do want to talk a little bit about the infectious diseases. Bats are known to be really great at being a reservoir for viruses. And I'll quickly mention a couple of the nasty ones, right? So SARS, MERS, Ebola. And there's a reason for this. Bats have a very unique immune system where they are able to coexist with a virus. So they house the virus in their body. They're able to be asymptomatic, so they show no signs of having the virus, and they are also live a full life. But what that means is they're successful at housing it. They can also share it to a similar, genetically similar animal like a mammal, another mammal like humans. Or animals that we may consume. So this is where we see spillover events going from a wildlife population into either maybe a intermediate population, like a pangolin is what they believe it, or a raccoon dog that may be the intermediate, or it might go directly into a food source that we consume. So couple of the things that are being studied right now is what makes bats so successful at this. Well, when they are only flyers, and when they fly, what happens is the temperature of their body temperature actually increases, and it's similar to a small fever. So it's mimicking a fever that we would have if we're infected with a virus, or some pathogen. We would have a fever as one of our immune responses. Well, these bats on a daily basis increase their temperature, and the virus that's they're housing is actually maintaining itself. So it's evolving in with these bats that have a very unique immune system. Another things is that with wildlife, zoonotic agents, pathogens that jump from a wild population into a human population, the big part of that is because we are encroaching on those populations. Our population needs more land, and so we're taking over these lands, and that's where, looking at what Wildland Trust does is extremely important, because it's maintaining a natural environment, a wild environment for our organisms to be at, and we're not taking away their roost space, etc. So that brings me to one of my absolute favorite places in Massachusetts, and that's the Great River Preserve in Bridgewater. Again, as Max said, if you haven't been there, go. It is a magical place, especially when you can get the wildflowers in bloom. But every time of the year, I see wildlife. I also see some great people that are enjoying this beautiful spot. It's right along the Taunton River, and it is really a important, special place. I've been able to do some bat work there, set my recordings, and I can tell you they have unique species that I'm in downtown Bridgewater, and I record here, and we have 3 species that I've recorded, but at Great River, I've recorded 5, which is some rare ones. So let's go through some Massachusetts bats. We have 9 species. 8 of them are relatively common. One, the Indiana bat, hasn't been seen for a couple of years, so that may be extinct from our region. But all of them fall within one family, and that's the Vesper bats, or evening bats. That's Vespertilion, its scientific name. I don't need that. But the Vesper bats, or evening bats, these are brown bats, are big brown. They are echolocators, really good at echolocating. And they also, some of them are hibernators during the winter. So females actually are going to, in the fall, they're going to mate in the fall, and then the females will store the sperm in their body until they emerge from hibernation 3 or 4 months later. And if their body is viable, right, if they can maintain a pregnancy, they will allow fertilization of that sperm into the egg to happen. And then they'll give birth to their pups around the end of June, early July. So you'll see a lot of very hungry mothers or I do at the time. So we can divide our bats into cave bats and tree bats. Tree bats, very colorful. These will migrate south in the winter. Cave bats will hibernate, and they're kind of brownish in color. So here are some of our main players that I saw at the Wildland Trust Preserve. We have the silver-haired, the eastern red bat has a really interesting pelage hair, the fur on it, and it's these are its hind legs. So in the back, it has a membrane in between its legs that it catches insects on. They're very red color, but it's furred, which is unlike other cave bats or other bats. And then the horay bat. Our horay is the largest bat we have, and it has like 3 tones to it. But all these bats are going to migrate. They roost in trees during the summer months, and when they go down south, so in like Carolinas, they're going to stay in those roosts. So they'll be outside roosting in trees. You may be able to see one during the day. What's affecting our tree bats, our migratory bats, are wind turbines. So our bats that are migratory, they follow a certain path, and they think they're following the lunar schedule, but they follow a certain path, and they go over large wind energy structures. And what happens is that these structures, these large turbine blades, as they turn, they're creating a vortex around them that is changing the pressure. So when a bat gets close to the turbine, it can hit it sometimes, and then that will cause mortality. But usually what happens is, because bats are mammals like us, they have a cavity where their lungs are. What happens is the change in pressure is actually causing their lungs to explode inside their body. And that's called barotrauma. And sorry, you can see a kind of gross picture down there, but those are little nodules that have exploded. So the sponginess of our lungs that allow oxygen in, those little spongy openings explode. And that causes huge mortality, about 1.8 million bats. More bats in certain areas, more bats die than birds. Birds are also, migratory birds are hugely affected. And this is where my kind of secondary job, working position as a wildlife consultant for ARC Industries. They're this new company that has a very unique small wind turbine called the Orb. And what's great is it's only been a year of a preliminary study, but I've found that the Orb actually deters bats. So this structure, kind of thinking outside of the box on how can we prevent these mortalities. They turn them off at certain times now, so there's a lot of regulation. And our brown bats, so these are our cave bats. Our biggest contender in Massachusetts, this is the big brown bat. And this is the one that if you have bats in your belfry, they're definitely going to be the big brown or little brown bat. These are they like to go into trees and stuff, but they kind of prefer bat houses or actual dwellings, like an old barn. You might see them. The little brown bat, this population has gone way down because of white nose syndrome, and I'll talk about that in a few slides. But this is a bat that for 5 years, I've only seen 1 or 2 a year. And when I was growing up, the majority, the largest population was the little brown. So their populations have plummeted. And then these are the 2 contenders that were threatened and endangered in Massachusetts and nationally. The northern long-eared and tricolored. I documented both of these. No, the recorders documented both of these at the Wildland Trust Preserve in Bridgewater. So very, very exciting. Now these bats, all of the cave bats are going to go into a cave during the winter, so they'll travel a couple 100 miles and they'll go back to the same cave again and again. And during this hibernation, if it's a daily hibernation, it's called torpor. A seasonal one, so long periods, is called true hibernation. Sorry, my kitty cat's wanting to say hi. So what happens during hibernation is that a bat will actually bring down its temperature, its body temperature, to the similar temperature to the cave itself that it's hanging off of, to a point you can actually see crystals on its fur. It also is going to bring its heart rate down to about 2 beats per minute and respire. So inhale, exhale about 2 times. This is where those wing membranes come in handy because it can respire through the membrane itself. And they spend 6 months, 4 to 6 months in this state. They do not eat. They'll wake up and drink, but that's about it. And what happens is they have a similar tissue, fat tissue in their body that infants have called brown adipose tissue, and it allows them to wake up very quickly. So they're not like a sleeping bear coming out of hibernation. They are very quick to arouse, which is dangerous if we have caves. You don't want to disturb caves, bats in caves. White nose syndrome, I mentioned that our populations have really plummeted, and that is due to white nose syndrome. This is a fungus. It's a cold-loving fungus, soil fungus, that has infected bats, especially their naked regions, so their nose, white nose, or their wings. This fungus actually grows into the skin membrane and interrupts and bothers them during hibernation. And what we see, this was first documented in New York, in a New York cave in 2006. And since then, it has spread through the country, so 40 states and 9 Canadian provinces. What they believe is that this may be a fungus that came from a cave in Europe, because European bats, it was identified, the same species of fungus was identified in Europe, but the European bats have able to co-evolve with it, so they don't die from it. So they believe that maybe when it was brought over, maybe by a spelunker or a caver that didn't clean their gear, it has just spread drastically to a point where bats will wake up because they're annoyed by this, structure on them in hibernation, and they'll fly out looking for insects and food. And so you have, like, outside the caves in the wintertime, it's just littered with dead bats. So 7 million have died because of white nose syndrome. But a lot of work has been done. This is a spread map. Again, it started here, and if you go through the years, it just spreads across the country. So it is found all through the country. But there is a lot of energy and money and research, scientific research, going into this. They're looking at different options, regulating the temperature, so not allowing the fungus to grow, giving individual bats vaccines, which is a tough one, giving volatile compounds to it, but we are seeing some increase in populations, which is good. But because of their life history, because they're long-lived, slow reproduction, we're seeing a slower jump in them. So it's very important to know, I touched on a lot of these, but bats are really good for us humans. They are helping in as keeping down pests in our agricultural fields. They are amazing pollinators. If you are a agave fan, aka a tequila fan, you have only bats to thank, because they're the only pollinators of that. They pollinate tons of other fruits as well. They help in reforestation. So when they consume those fruits, they fly, and they fly distances, and they poop out those seeds and allow for forests to be regained. They're scientifically, they're really interesting in how in their efforts in looking at vaccines. Their immune response is very unique. They are very interesting in looking at their navigational aids, because for the blind, visually impaired, right, we're looking at these organisms that are able to, they have the sixth sense of echolocation. So whether or not you want one in your house, which I'm sure you don't, they are very valuable overall. And you can help our bats. The best way to help our bats is to share what you've learned today, of the positive things that you've learned, and also build a bat house. There's a lot of specs, especially Bat Conservation International has, if you are handy with a tool, I have a husband who always has this huge workshop, and he's made a couple of bat houses for me. They're just very, very specific on what they require. So make sure you follow the directions on bathhouse building. You also want to, if you own land, leave wild parts in your land. So if you have a snag tree, you know, the top of the tree breaks off, that is a good spot for not only bats, but a lot of other creatures, good creatures, owls, different types of birds. If your tree falls, leave it. Leave the dead trees on the ground. You have salamanders and snakes that can use that as a home. So I think my thing is share the environment, right? Find a humane, if you have bats in your house, contact a humane eradicator for that. There's more and more strict rules about eradicating bats during the summertime, especially if it's a nursery roost, because bats are now protected. Hey, but so you would have to wait until their season is over, so September, October. But if a bat gets in your living quarters, close that room, open the windows, close that room, turn off the lights, and walk away from that room for the night. The bat wants out too, so it wants to get away from you. If it doesn't, there are certain websites I'll share with you that you can humanely and safely get that bat out of your house. But screaming at it with a Swiffer, that doesn't work. It just stresses everybody out, especially the cats. They don't like it. So I know I went longer, way longer than I should have, but I just really appreciate the time and the ability to share my crazy obsession with bats with you all tonight. I welcome a lot of questions if you have them, but thank you, Max, for letting me do my research at the site, or opening that up, and also opening this opportunity up.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's so exciting to hear about, finding threatened bat species at Great Rivers. So I appreciate you highlighting the preserve and the work that you do, and being flexible to give the talk. So if anyone has questions, if you want to unmute yourself to ask questions, or put them in the chat and I can read them aloud for you, whatever people prefer.
Can I ask a couple quick questions?
Absolutely.
I live on the west side of Bridgewater, and I've noticed we've been here 50 years and we just don't see bats anymore at dusk. I'm questioning why is that the case? And secondly, do bats have any predators? Do other animals go after bats at all?
Yes. So the biggest predator, humans. We're kind of aggressive in our approach to eradicating them. The other predators that a bat will have are snakes. But that's usually like in other parts of the world. You'll have boa constrictors that are actually will hang outside of an opening of a cave, waiting for them to emerge, and they just like grab them. Other bats will eat smaller bats, and raptors will eat them. So there's a lot of eagles and hawks that love, like there's some beautiful nature footage of bats, thousands of bats emerging from a cave, and they just are getting picked off by the birds. But concerning the the number of individuals, yes, hugely dropped. And that is due to white nose syndrome. So the majority of the bats you probably had in your backyard were the little brown bat, and their population has gone down, I want to say 96% regionally. So they're the ones that they like to chirp at night. Like they come out a little bit earlier. The bats that you probably, if you do see, are one or two individuals. Those usually are the eastern red bat, or most likely it's the big brown bat, which I lovingly call meatball with wings, because they're little chubby little guys. So yeah, that's it. It mainly is. The other factor is building structures, right? So there's a lot of construction and new developments that are happening in Bridgewater and the areas, and that's building structures and eliminating trees for our bats, eliminating water sources, because bats need to drink too. So a lot of our wildlife is affected from that.
Thank you.
Hi, Maria, I have a question. So with the vampire bats, and they suck our blood, do we have to worry about them passing deadly diseases to humans? And is that a concern, especially when we're thinking about COVID and all that stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's extremely rare situations that a common vampire bat would feed off of a human, to the point it has to be. So they'll feed off of cows, cattle, and swine, right? So they'll go to a farm, and it's mainly in rural areas in like Brazil and South and Central America that they'll feed off of them. In extreme rare situations when there's no other food, they've noted that a vampire will feed off of a human. It is sensationalized a lot. Discovery Channel, nothing against them, but they actually called up my mentor in grad school. He was he worked on vampires, and he got a call from Discovery asking him to allow a vampire to feed off of him. So they will transmit diseases if they have it. Going off of that, rabies is a big concern. A lot of people are, and rightfully so, rabies is not something that you want. I have the vaccinations for it. But in a population of bats, about 0.5% is rabid, so that they're carrying this virus. But they're atypical to other animals. So a rabid fox or dog is going to be aggressive. It's going to, foam at the mouth. A rabid bat is actually going to be really lethargic, so tired. This is a bat that you're going to see out during the daytime, maybe just like sitting out on the grass and not actually in a tree. These are the signs that any wildlife, but especially this, signs that this is not a healthy bat. So you keep your distance. You call the town to come and get it. If a bat is like hanging in a tree and it's just there and out of your way, just leave it. It's probably not rabid, but it's the atypical behavior for that. When I go out batting, I wear gloves. I actually wear batting gloves. It's the only time I'm ever in a sports store, right? Because they have nice leather structures. So if a bat, and they have teeny tiny teeth, if a bat bites me, it's not going to go through that leather. But I take precautions because I should, because that's, I'm a trained bat biologist. I don't want to be like, I have rabies. That's good.
Okay.
So.
Two more questions. One is a quick one. Did your mentor say yes to the Discovery Channel?
I was in the room when he was talking with them, and he's from New York, and he didn't hold much back in his response. It was an interesting conversation.
to be a bat on the wall. I'm
I-
sorry. But the second question is, you were saying that the reason they can be host to so many infectious diseases is because their temperature raises when they fly up. Why doesn't that raised temperature kill the virus?
Because the virus co-evolved with that.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, so it actually makes the virus more I'm not a virologist, but aggressive, I guess, when it enters into a mammal that doesn't have that. So it can maintain, it can fight that first line of defense in our bodies.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm. Do we have any other questions?
I have a quick question.
Yes.
When you were doing the recordings at Great River and you found 5 different species, how do you tell the difference between species just from the recordings?
Yeah, so I actually have a really good analysis software. So I record the raw recordings and I run it through this analyses that looks at the structure of each call, and they compare the call itself, the pulses, to a known library of calls. So I choose, North America, Massachusetts. So it narrows down my species, and it's able to compare it to a library and say that 62 out of the 90 pulses match the big brown bat. And then I go through, so it automatically gives me an ID, and then I go through tediously through 10,000 calls and manually confirm that. So the software does it initially, and then, or I just get an undergrad researcher to do it, which is also fun.
Cool, thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I've seen nature shows where there are moths that have evolved to essentially try and jam the bat signals and respond back. Is that
Yeah.
something that you have observed, or is this in far-flung
No.
parts?
I've so the jamming mechanism in moths, they actually, it's a particular lineage of moths that have co-evolved, and they create in their, I think it's their abdomen, a jamming mechanism. So it literally stops from the pulse, and it stops the echo. So it jams the whole echolocation structure. It's unbelievable. If you look up, like on YouTube, bat, moth jamming bat, or something along those, I'm like, oh, maybe more specifics. You'll see the bat, like they have the bats flying, and then the moth like jams it and is about to go for it, and then it totally is like, where am I? What happened? I haven't seen that firsthand, but I have seen the bickering of bats in my backyard, and how maybe both of them were going for the same moth, and they're very good at not bumping into each other, but they both wanted the same spoonful of food. So there's if you watch them evening after evening in your backyard, you're going to see personalities come out. I think not individual personalities, but personalities of the species for sure. Some of the things that you can do to identify what species you have is, if you are at least steady hand, you can do a flashlight and see if it's brown in color. If it's red in color, that's an eastern red bat. So there's if it looks like a meatball with wings, it's definitely a big brown. Well, do definitely. I appreciate all of you coming out today. You have my contact information if you want to, connect with me and just chat more about bats. I will always respond if it's like bats are cool as a heading. But do also try and look at some of these wonderful resources. Bat Conservation International, that was actually started by Merlin Tuttle. All of the images that Merlin Tuttle, his whole library, I think of like 3,000 or so images are all available on his bat conservation website. Bats Live, if you have kids or if you're an educator, there's some fun activities that you can do as well. And I really can't express how thankful I am for having Wildland Trust in this area that has a free place that I can go and enjoy and have a nature walk and meet new people that have a similar mindset. But maintaining that connection with nature is really important. And I think UMass and I thank Wildland Trust for this opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope one day in the future you could try to organize actually being in person at Great River and going on a walk, because I'm sure it would have been really special to see them outside. But
Yeah. Well, maybe if you have the time, it's about the right time, put on some bug spray, walk out in your backyard and just look up.
see them right at home.
Yes.
Mhm.
That's what I'm doing tonight.
Yeah, well, thank you everyone so much for attending. This was recorded, so it'll be up on the Wildlands Trust website under events and recorded presentations if you ever want to rewatch it or share it with somebody else. And then I always just say look out for future events with Wildlands. We have stuff every single month, and hopefully in the future we'll have a bat walk with Maria. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Excellent, Maria. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sherry, for coming.
Oh, yeah.